Ever wonder if there's a profession that pays a fortune, yet demands absolute and soul-crushing agony in return? Today, Last Movie is stepping into the harrowing boots of a crime scene technician through Strange Harvest, Occult Murder. This harrowing mockumentary chronicles the relentless pursuit of a prolific, sadistic serial killer through the eyes of the detectives and forensic specialists tracking his bloody wake. Who is he, and what drives his unspeakable brutality? Let's dive in. The nightmare began on July 9, 2010. In the residential neighborhood of San Bernardino within the Inland Empire, California. The Sheridan family had gone dark, dropping completely off the community's radar for days. Casey Potter, a friend of young Tiffany Sheridan, sounded the alarm by dialing 911 after discovering that Tiffany had been unexcused from school. While neither of her parents answered calls or text messages, the authorities moved fast. Local police arrived at the Sheridan residence, pounding on the door to absolute silence. Forcing entry through the back, they stepped into a house that no longer functions as a home. It had transformed into a theater of unimaginable slaughter. All three members of the family were dead, seated upright around the dining table. Their bodies were tightly bound with heavy-duty packing tape and fishing line, their hands meticulously fixed in a permanent posture of prayer. Beneath each chair sat a bucket, placed with chilling precision to catch the draining blood. But what froze the blood in the veins of seasoned investigators was the cryptic, blasphemous symbol the killer left scrawled across the ceiling above them. Detective Joseph Kirby immediately recognized the sickening signature, tying the nightmare directly to a frozen case he handled 15 years prior, right here in San Bernardino. In August 1993, the mutilated body of Shiffra Gutierrez, a 24-year-old woman, was discovered deep within the San Bernardino National Forest. After vanishing without a trace, she was found carved apart, her remains buried beneath a blue plastic tarp, uterus surgically excised. Investigators estimated she died roughly 2 weeks before discovery. Monica, a friend of the victim, described Shiffra as a free spirit living dangerously on the edge. Shiffra was last seen at Casablanca with an unidentified man, hiding out in a room at a rundown flophouse called Dean's Corner, a notorious hub for underground vice. That unnamed man instantly became the prime suspect. According to the motel's ragged ledger, the man registered under the alias Albert Shiny, leaving behind zero trace or legitimate leads. Because victims like Shiffra lived on society's margins, the case was quietly swept aside, filed away as a minor assault with little public outcry. But the authorities were dead wrong. 9 months later, another ritualistic slaughter shattered the peace in Alonza. The victim was an 82-year-old reclusive veteran named Ambrose Griffith, living entirely alone in an apartment near the airfield. Confined to his bed by severe paralysis, Ambrose relied entirely on community caregivers to survive. Investigators established that on the night of July 3, 1994, the killer slipped inside through an unlatched, louvered window at the back of the building. The elderly man was brutally beaten with his own medical oxygen tank and slashed over 30 times with a utility knife, dying a slow, agonizing death right on his mattress. The true horror emerged when detectives realized one of the victim's eyeballs had been deliberately carved out and stolen. Blood residue, footprints, and fingerprint sweeps yielded nothing. Another dead end wrapped in the phantom name Albert Shiny. Yet the carnage refused to stop. October 1995 plunged the community into panic when parents sounded the alarm for 12-year-old Noah Lafont after he vanished while walking home from school. Massive, desperate search parties scoured every inch of San Bernardino. 3 grueling months passed before Noah's decomposing remains finally surfaced. He was found submerged in a creek near Silverwood Lake, weighed down by a heavy block of concrete, his abdomen brutally slashed and his liver surgically removed. A utility knife rested at the scene alongside Noah's abandoned school backpack. Inside, investigators pulled a single torn book page that left a deep, ghostly impression on the following sheet, a solitary word scrawled or embossed. Caliban. Is this a character name from Shakespeare's The Tempest, or an encrypted signature? Caliban became a taunting riddle, daring the task force to look closer at an evil they were entirely unequipped to comprehend. 2 weeks after Noah's remains surfaced, the Riverside Police Department received an anonymous letter detailing the exact mechanics of Shiffra, Ambrose and Noah's murders. The letter laid bare classified details that only law enforcement, the killer himself or someone intimately connected to the atrocities, could possibly know. At the bottom of the page sat a taunting sign-off, Mr. Shiny, accompanied by a chilling promise that he was far from finished and aimed to hit a total of 10 victims. Only then did Joe Kirby and the task force officially acknowledge the grim reality of a serial predator. Yet years ground on with zero breakthroughs, Mr. Shiny went completely silent, causing the 3 cold cases to fade into dust as investigators assumed he had either stopped killing or died. That is, until the 3-legged triangle symbol materialized on the ceiling of the Sheridan home, identical to the insignia scrawled in that long ago letter. The killer slipped inside through the first-floor bathroom vent. Just after Tiffany finished sending an email to a colleague, she and her husband were ambushed in their bedroom at roughly 1:15 a.m. Overpowered and marched downstairs alongside their daughter Samantha, the family was forced to sit in a tight circle around the dining table. Their mouths and limbs were tightly bound with heavy-duty packing tape before they bled out in the posture of prayer. More horrifying still, 5-gallon paint buckets sat beneath each chair, each labeled with a victim's name alongside hand-drawn measurement lines marking 3 progressive stages: dying, about to die, and dead. According to forensic analysis, the killer used a utility knife to carve precise, non-lethal wounds into the victims' bodies. The blood drained steadily into the buckets, forcing the Sheridan family to endure the agonizing, slow-motion execution of themselves and each other. The killer lingered inside the home for at least 2 hours. Mr. Shiny went outside, retrieved a 24-foot extension ladder, carried it back indoors, and painted the 3-legged triangle symbol on the ceiling using the victim's blood, carefully ensuring not a single drop hit the floor below. Every step was executed in total silence, leaving 0 disturbances at the perimeter and no forensic trace behind. 3 days later, a second letter from Mr. Shiny arrived at the station, proving his threats were deadly serious. The severed head of Tamara Lee was discovered in Parish Hill Park, propped directly in the center of a 3-legged triangle constructed from branches and stones. Earlier, intruders breached the home Tamara shared with her boyfriend Glenn Sandwich, crawling through the pet door while Tamara relaxed in the living room. The blaring television drowned out the creeping dread. Mr. Shiny blindsided her at gunpoint. When Glenn arrived home from work, he narrowly escaped death, only for the intruder to brutally scorch his face with a propane blowtorch, shattering his life forever. Glenn later provided a composite sketch of the suspect. Though it yielded few practical leads, Tamara's severed head was hauled to Parish Hill, accompanied nearby by a water jug writhing with leeches, surrounded by flickering candles. Near the crime scene, a local woman came forward with a crucial lead. She spotted a white pickup truck bearing red lettering loaded with trash bags, heading toward the local scrapyard on the morning of the murder. Armed with this description, investigators traced the vehicle to 45-year-old Victor Chamas, a local painter with a prior criminal record. Victor instantly rocketed to the top of the suspect list. But during the interrogation, Detective Kirby and forensic specialist Lexi Taylor quickly realized the truth. Victor was completely clueless about the mechanics of the murders. He insisted the white truck was stolen by a masked man who ambushed and overpowered him. The mask, described as having 3 stark circular holes cut out for the eyes and mouth. Soon another taunting letter arrived, unspooling a chilling revelation. Mr. Shiny's killings were part of a dark mystical sacrifice traded for eternal glory. Months dragged on in agonizing silence, offering 0 viable leads to the task force. But one thing was terrifyingly clear. Mr. Shiny was far from finished. In the dead of night, Kirby received an emergency dispatch, pulling him to an abandoned indoor swimming pool at a derelict aquatic center, long forgotten by the city. A group of reckless teenagers trespassing inside made a stomach-turning discovery: a naked man dead at the bottom of the drained pool. The rim of the pool was tightly wound with razor-sharp barbed wire to strip away any chance of escape, and the man's body was swarmed by a writhing mass of fat, bloated leeches. The autopsy confirmed he didn't drown. He bled to death. The victim was identified as Dennis Zhao, a 43-year-old Chinese immigrant, last seen boarding a bus 4 days prior. Even more sickening was the realization that the leeches weren't just tossed in. They were meticulously cultivated. Their growth cycles were calculated with precision. 3 weeks to hatch, 2 weeks to mature under optimal conditions. Their primary food source? Dennis Zhao himself. The slow-motion execution took 3 agonizing days as his blood was systematically drained by thousands of clinging mouths. But why didn't anyone hear him scream? Because the killer carved out his tongue before dropping him into the pit, and the leeches weren't chosen at random. The tiny, lice-shaped incisions they left behind in the skin formed a sickening signature, a 3-legged triangle. Checking the victim's computer history, Detective Kirby and Taylor discovered that Zhao made contact with the killer through a gay personal forum, tracing the email exchange. The task force pinpointed the communications back to public Wi-Fi, accessed from a local Preston coffee shop. During the transmission windows, only 3 baristas were on duty, none of whom could recall specific customers, and the shop lacked security cameras. The sole glimmer of hope came from a local homeless man named Johnson, who frequently hung out near the storefront. By sheer coincidence, Johnson crossed paths with the driver of the red-lettered white pickup truck. The mysterious motorist had previously hired Johnson to clean up his overgrown yard, driving him out to the property. That chance encounter handed the detectives a direct route to the killer's lair. Johnson mentioned wearing a medical alert bracelet for diabetes that he scavenged from a landfill. Intrigued by the shiny accessory, the suspect questioned Johnson about his health. When Johnson casually admitted he just found it and wasn't actually sick, the man's demeanor snapped instantly, turning venomous as he threw Johnson out of the vehicle. That discarded trinket likely spared Johnson's life. Retracing the route described by Johnson, the police zeroed in on the suspect's isolated safe house. The structure stood intact, but Mr. Shiny was nowhere to be found. The undeniable proof confirming his identity was the 3-legged triangle stamped directly onto the back door. A classified symbol never leaked to the media, meaning its presence guaranteed Mr. Shiny's footprint. The tactical team breached the premises, only to find a hollow, uninhabited shell. The interior was sparse, furnished with outdated, obsolete relics. Public records revealed the deed belonged to a woman living down in San Diego who leased the property to a man named Albert Shiny. With a full year's rent paid strictly in cash, the landlord barely interacted with her elusive tenant. Desperate for forensic breakthroughs, investigators swept for prints. Knowing the killer likely wore gloves, luck finally broke when a single, pristine, latent fingerprint surfaced on an outdoor telescope positioned in the yard. As expected, it matched physical evidence pulled straight from Noah LaFont's 1995 cold case. The owner of that print was identified as Leslie Sykes. Cross-referencing Johnson's descriptions and the landlord's statements confirmed Leslie as their man. But a deeper background check revealed a ghost. No criminal record, no employment history, no permanent address, no phone bills, and 0 tax filings for over 2 decades. He was a phantom moving unseen through society. A federal warrant was immediately issued, but true to form, the broadcast went completely unnoticed by the public, except for Mr. Shiny himself. Shortly after the warrant dropped, another letter arrived at the precinct, stamped with the signature 3-legged triangle. The killer's message was chilling. Leslie Sykes had been cleansed. Nothing could stop the Ascension, and 5 targets remained. True to his word, the bloodshed resumed just a month later. The victim was 16-year-old high school student Victoria Masero. On the night of March 19th, Victoria was home alone, broadcasting a live makeup tutorial from her bedroom, hearing heavy footfalls echoing downstairs. She opened her door to investigate whether her mother had returned, only to scream in terror as Leslie stepped from the shadows. Victoria was executed with a gunshot live on camera. Refusing to hide, the killer stared directly into the lens behind his 3-holed mask, picked up Victoria's tube of lipstick, and smeared the 3-legged triangle across the bedroom wall. He dragged her lifeless body onto the bed, hovering over her with his hands raised, chanting a silent incantation. The digital feed blurred into heavy static before cutting to black. The camera feed flickered back online moments later, just in time to capture Mr. Shiny crawling away, vanishing into the night. Mom and Dad arrived home just in time, rushing their bloodied daughter to the hospital. Miraculously, Victoria survived a point-blank gunshot to the head and 2 grazing rounds to the shoulder, but the sanctuary of a hospital room offered no shelter from a shadow. Taking advantage of a shift change, Leslie slipped past heavy security disguised as a medical orderly. He crept into the restricted storage ward, methodically injecting industrial cleaning solvent straight into a secured bag of AB-negative blood. Minutes later, that poisoned unit was transfused into Victoria. She flatlined on the gynecological ward bed, expiring while armed guards stood unaware just on the other side of the door. A sickening question haunted the task force. How did Leslie know her precise room number and rare blood type? Even with a confirmed name, the dossier on Leslie Sykes remained a ghost town. Records showed he was once married to a woman named Susan Hemler, who tragically died by suicide in 2008. Desperate for a break, the department slapped an $80,000 bounty on his head. Jared Kelly, a former acquaintance of Leslie, was hauled in for questioning. Jared painted a picture of a man who was once nothing more than an introverted hiking enthusiast. But something inside Leslie snapped after he explored a remote, uncharted cave. He torched his own home, abandoned his vehicles, and began spewing feverish, apocalyptic rhetoric before vanishing entirely into the wilderness around 1991. Before Jared's testimony could lead to a tactical move, emergency dispatches lit up the switchboard once more. The target this time was Caesar, a loyal pit bull belonging to an elderly couple, Miles and Kelly Harris. The intruder zeroed in on the couple's bedroom, completely unaware of the dog. Caesar bolted into the dark, savagely attacking the prowler to shield his owners. The brave hound paid with his life, sustaining fatal stab wounds before the killer vaulted the backyard fence and melted back into the night. Armed guards immediately descended on the Harris residence, locking down the perimeter to ensure Victoria's nightmare was never repeated. Unfazed by the reinforced security, Leslie pivoted to a brutal backup plan. Leo Ditz, a graveyard shift baker working alone at a local pastry shop, was cornered behind the counter and butchered by the masked phantom. Not content with a simple murder, the killer dragged the lifeless baker into the back kitchen, slicing open his chest cavity to harvest his heart, leaving the signature three-legged triangle branded in blood on the tile. A local witness named Malik caught a chilling glimpse of a strange figure wearing the signature three-holed mask lurking near the bakery. It didn't take long for the police to track down Leslie's abandoned vehicle, but losing his car did nothing to halt the carnage. Kirby's phone lit up with a digital file sent directly by Malik. The footage was a snuff film capturing the execution of a man in a derelict playground, his body mutilated in a grotesque inversion of the physical world, his hands locked tight to the swing chains, while his entire weight hung suspended by his own flayed skin. In a horrifying twist of irony, the mutilated victim was Malik himself. Clutched in his lifeless hands was a final letter and a burned CD packaged directly by the killer's hands. The video documented Malik's agonizing torture, forced to choke out apologies for blaspheming against an unseen deity before meeting a merciless end. The task force realized that Leslie wasn't playing cat and mouse with law enforcement. He viewed them as an irrelevance, entirely fixated on completing his macabre ledger. The only way to stop the bloodshed was to predict his final coordinates. Analyzing the optics of the recovered outdoor telescope from Leslie's safe house, investigators discovered the lens wasn't pointed at a terrestrial horizon. It was permanently locked onto Ophiuchus, a mysterious constellation sitting just outside the traditional zodiac, historically symbolizing a warrior wrestling a giant serpent. On the night of May 13th, a rare, once in 8 centuries, celestial alignment occurred within that exact cluster as Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn locked into a straight line. Fringe esoteric cults lived for nights like this, leveraging planetary conjunctions to fuel ritualistic blood sacrifices. Tracing a custom keychain left in Leslie's abandoned car, the team finally located his primary storage garage. Inside lay a sickening subterranean museum, preserved body parts, harvested from past victims, racks of customized murder weapons, and the final dispatch from Mr. Shiny, announcing that the ultimate sacrifice was ready to be unlocked to grant an ancient entity its freedom. Late on the night of May 12th, a fractured 911 distress call shattered the switchboard. Investigators quickly traced the ping to the Cortland residence. Plunging into a nightmare, a young couple lay brutally slaughtered, and their 3-month-old infant. Sawyer had been torn from his crib and abducted. If the theory of an Ophiuchus Alignment sacrifice held true, the The killer's ideal coordinates to harness the cosmic convergence sat deep within the dense shadows of the San Bernardino National Forest. Driven by this grim calculus, Detectives Kirby and Taylor rushed to the mountains on the night of May 13th to stake out the terrain and lay a trap. At the exact same time, amateur astronomers flocked to the park to witness the once in 8 centuries celestial show. Police were forced to flood the perimeter, frisking spectators to ensure Leslie wasn't melting into the stargazing crowd, but he was nowhere to be found among the tents and telescopes. At 4:11 a.m., dispatch center lit up again. An emergency call placed by a guest at a remote mountain motel nestled inside the National Reserve. Officers swarmed the property, making contact with the frantic caller, Sylvia Vallejo, who stammered that her husband Martin was assaulted by a masked intruder who was hauling an infant. Kicking open the door, officers spotted a masked figure slumped silently in the corner. Stepping closer, they realized the horrifying reality. The victim's wrists were bound tight with packing tape, and beneath the 3-hole mask wasn't Leslie at all, but Martin himself, cold and lifeless. Just before 6 a.m., sharp gunfire tore through the forest canopy, rushing toward the echoes. Officers stumbled upon a towering pyre constructed in the exact shape of a 3-legged triangle. The blinding glare of their flashlights betrayed their position, making them sitting ducks as gunfire erupted from the dark, dropping several officers to the dirt. In a display of chilling audacity, Leslie executed a wounded policeman, stripped the body cam straight from his tactical vest, and stepped up to the blazing pyre to record the ritual ascension. Overhead, Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn locked into a terrifying equilateral triangle across the night sky. A brilliant, unnatural crimson flare flashed at the dead center of the alignment. Instantly, every recording device, camera, and radio across the grid died in a simultaneous wave of static. The strange red glow bled outward, staining the clouds a bruised, violent scarlet. Among the distant stargazers, a woman named Kat suddenly froze, her eyes rolling back as she collapsed into a violent, rhythmic seizure beneath the bleeding sky. Back at the altar, just as Leslie lifted a torch to immolate infant Sawyer, the tactical team breached the tree line. A single decisive gunshot dropped the killer before the flames could catch, snatching the baby from the jaws of the abyss. Leslie's lifeless body slipped over the edge of the ravine, plunging down the slope. When recovery teams pulled him from a creek 100 yards below, his face was already completely smothered by a writhing mass of fat, bloated leeches. Though he had barely been in the water for minutes, the reign of terror that bled San Bernardino for decades finally shattered against the cold reality of death, leaving behind a staggering toll of broken lives and haunted investigators. On August 23, 2023, Detective Kirby returned alone to the San Bernardino National Forest for a solitary expedition. His destination, the mouth of the Cozo Caves. Carrying the crushing weight of a nearly 20-year obsession was no small burden, especially when fueled by the lingering echoes of a dead monster's sadistic philosophy. Walking those lonely trails served as a stark reminder of the quiet, brutal nobility demanded of crime scene specialists. A calling meant only for the chosen few with hearts of steel and minds unyielding to madness.